Hello, and thanks for taking a few minutes to look at a quick demo of our Impact Operating System platform. Just to tee things up really quickly, I wanted to just kind of baseline what the Impact OS is really all about. A lot of people are pretty familiar with the Inform IoT platform that Validic has offered to the market for many years now. 500 plus data sources, recently very much focused on growing our list of clinical data sources on that platform. But what we found a lot of times with our clients was that they really struggled to take advantage of that connectivity platform, mostly in very consistent areas. And so we created on top of that connectivity platform our Impact Operating System, which helps solve some pretty common problems that we saw across our clients. How do I create template protocols for the data types that I care about for a particular subpopulation in my larger population? How do I set the protocols, the thresholds, the parameters for those data types? How do I then allow a care team to personalize those metrics so that they can really dial in exactly what's relevant for each individual patient? How do I visualize that data? How do I give clinicians something that's very easy to very quickly understand what's happening with my patients directly inside my clinical workflows? Even onboarding patients is something that we found tended to be a pretty big challenge for organizations. How do I let the patient know that they are even invited to participate in this program? What's the workflow to easily connect these devices? All of those things, even consenting to data sharing through the program. Then once they've connected the data, how do I monitor it? How do I bring the right things to the right care team members' attention in a timely fashion, and even being able to support those patients throughout the process? And so through the next 20-25 minutes or so, we'll take a look at each of these workflows that Impact supports. So clicking in, the first thing that we're going to look at is a role that we call the program administrator role. So how do we create templates that we can roll out quickly to our care team that can then be personalized to the patient later? So let's take a look at that. So I'm in what we call our Impact Program Administrator Toolkit. And as you can see, I've already built out a lot of different programs here. I'm going to scroll down to a program that we built a while ago that I call the Multi-Condition Monitoring Program. And when we first created this program, we did some basic things. We gave it a name, a description. Then we listed the organizations that we wanted to make this program available to. And this can really be any way that you think about your organization. This could be regional, it could be by practice, by facility, by specialty, really any way that you can communicate to us subdivisions of your population and your care team. We can set those up as sub-organizations that programs can be built around. Then I pick the languages that I want to support. And lastly, the measurement types that we want to support in this program. And these little checkboxes are actually doing a lot of work for us. When I check weight, it's then going into that IoT platform and recruiting all of the connectivity, the data type, sub-data types, the data sources that we support, making those all available inside each program with a simple click of the button. So no code way to create new protocols very quickly to pull in all of the different data types that our data connectivity platform supports. Once I pick those data types, now I'm going to start setting up the goals that I want to make available in this program. And as we can see here, we've already set up quite a few goals here. Keep your blood glucose levels between 75 and 140. Measure blood pressure 1 time per day. Measure blood pressure 3 times per day. So we can see here that our admins have created some extra. So I'm going to just delete that one. And the way we created each of these was really quick. Now that I picked the data types that I care about, Impact makes available to me all of the different ways I can reason over these data types. So for example, blood glucose, Impact knows that there's a concept of fasting versus post-meal. Blood pressure, that there's a systolic and diastolic component. So if I pick one of those, I can then pick all of the different ways that I can set a goal around that metric. So for example, an average reading limit, keep your 1-day average systolic blood pressure level less than or equal to blank. Well, 1-day average isn't very interesting, so I'm going to pick a 14-day and say keep your average systolic blood pressure lower than 130. Of course, I could also pick other things. For example, if I wanted to look at your fasting blood glucose, I could say I want your 7-day average fasting blood glucose to be between 70 and 100. I don't want you to bottom out, but I also don't want to see your fasting blood glucose too high. We offer a couple additional options for each goal that we set up. Can the clinician edit this goal, and can the clinician disable this goal? And we do this because different types of programs will have different types of needs. For example, if I'm rolling a program out to a team of care managers, and maybe I have 50 care managers in my organization, I'm probably going to want to lock all of these down pretty tightly because I want the patient to have the same program regardless of what care manager they get assigned. Vice versa, if we're doing a higher acuity heart failure monitoring program, rolling this out to a team of cardiologists, I may need to give those cardiologists a lot of control, or they're just not going to adopt the tool. So we give that flexibility for each of the goals that we have in the program, to really allow you to tailor programs in the way that makes most sense for your organization. Now that I've set up goals, I can go over to my notifications, or we can think of these as actions. And this is, what do we want to have happen when certain criteria are met on the platform? So for example, if we started with that fasting blood glucose that we looked at before, when we first start and we say if average fasting blood glucose is less than 70 over 7 days, that feels a lot like that goal that I set up just a minute ago. The difference is we can now trigger an action to happen. So I might want to set this a little bit more aggressively. So maybe I'm going to set 65 milligrams per deciliter. And now in this drop down, you can see a bunch of different options for what I'd like to see happen based on that criteria. So for example, I could send a message to an electronic health record messaging pool via secure message. I could send a clinician an email or a text message. I could text the member. I could do a system alert inside of Impact. All of these are really just starting points. When we do implementations of the Impact OS, we look at the systems that are already in place in our client's organization, and we add each of those systems as additional options here. So for example, if you have a care management solution that has a care manager tasking function, we would add care manager task as another action that could be triggered based on these rules. If you have an AI chat platform and you would like to start an AI chat conversation with a patient based on a metric reading, we build that as a effector arm for Impact. And once we built that integration one time, again, in a no code fashion, we can start to build rules that can engage all of those systems. So in this case, I'm going to say fasting blood glucose less than 65 over 7 days. I want to send a message to a clinician. I can then enter a subject and a message that would be attached to that message when it gets sent into the clinical system. And then I go ahead and save that. Last thing to point out really quickly is, similar to our goals, we have some additional controls around these actions. So is this rule required? Can the clinician turn it on or off, just like we discussed with goals, as well as should this be marked as a high priority item? So a lot of downstream systems have the concept of prioritization. If I turn that to on, this would then push into that other system as a high priority message when it gets triggered. Last thing to show really quickly, now that we've built out our goals and notifications, is the content. So there's a lot of content that your care team is going to interact with, as well as your patient, throughout the program. Everything from the email the member receives when they get invited to a program, to the consent language they need to agree to when they join the program. All of this content is very personal to your organization. So we always make all of that content available in the admin tool for each language your program supports so that you can really make this program your own. We don't want to be in the business of closing dozens of support tickets every week, updating language in the application or in the downstream systems. You don't want to log those tickets, so we make all of that available directly here in the admin tool. So now that I've created my program, just to kind of recap, we have created a program template. It's standardized for that program, what data types we care about, what parts of my organization this program is going to be available to, what we want the default goals for that program to be, what actions we want set up by default when certain rules are triggered, and all of the content that is going to be encountered by the care team and the patients. So now that we've done that, let's take a look at what it looks like for a care team member to actually enroll a patient in the program. So I'm accessing our Impact rapid deployment solution. So this is a version of Impact that enables us to run it directly inside of a web browser. We made this option available as a very quick start type of solution. If we're not even talking about single sign-on, we can literally have Impact rapid deployment stood up for a care team in a matter of hours. And it's just accessed through a web browser and very simple turnkey solution. We'll circle back a little bit later and talk about what it looks like when we integrate directly inside the electronic health record. So know that that's coming. So when I'm a clinician and I've identified a patient that I want to get enrolled in an Impact program, I just click the enroll button. And when we're doing an enrollment through the web browser, obviously I have to provide some demographics. When we deploy directly inside of a care management or electronic health record system, we pull the demographics dynamically so the care team doesn't need to type this information in, but I'm going to go ahead and get myself enrolled. And I'm going to pick the program that we looked at earlier. So if I scroll down here, I can pick that multi-condition monitoring program, and then I click next. Now that I've picked that program, it's going to show me all of the goals that were set up in that admin tool just a few minutes ago. But now I'm enrolling a specific patient, and I'm a care team member, I'm a physician, a care manager. So now I have an opportunity to start dialing in all of those goals to be more patient specific. So you can see here that the admin required me to keep most of these, but I can see at the bottom here I have one rule that is optional. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that one on. And I'm also going to say that for this patient, I want a little tighter control. So I'm going to say, I want you to keep your blood glucose between 80 and 140. But I also know maybe that this patient is very hypertensive and we're starting to titrate things in. So maybe a more realistic goal to start this patient might be 150 over 100. So I'm going to tailor those two. Go ahead and click next. Oh, and we saw here that there is something additional I need to do. One of the rules set up here is if my SpO2 is less than 88%, so it's really low, I'm going to send a message to an in-basket pool to enable the broader care team to monitor these patients on an ongoing basis. So maybe there's a pool that monitors 24/7 for issues. And in this case, it's my multi-condition monitoring pool. So now there's multiple nurses that all will receive this message via a pool. So I'm going to go ahead and now click enroll. And this patient's now enrolled. So for a provider that isn't explaining what they're doing as they walk through, and for a provider that's using this directly inside their EHR instead of enrolling through a web browser, that enrollment can be as quick as a couple of seconds if they're going to take the defaults right off the bat. So now that we've enrolled the patient, we need the patient to actually go ahead and get connected to the program. And so the next step that's going to happen is we're going to put on our patient hat. So for the patient, I'm going to pull up my mobile phone here, and I'm going to skip the first couple steps because if you've ever signed up for a web application before, you've done very similar things. So the first step was I got an email that invited me, in this case, to download the Validic HealthBridge app. When I clicked that link and downloaded the app, it asked me to register. When I was asked to register, it sent me another email that wanted me to verify my that I have access to that email. So just gave me an activation code, and that's where we're going to pick up. So I've activated my account, created a password, and now I need to actually connect a device, or in this case, because it's a many condition, many data source program, many different devices, I'm just going to connect my glucose meter here as the patient. So I'm going to hit connect glucose meter, and HealthBridge has instructions for all of the different glucose meters or blood pressure cuffs or pulse oximeters, whatever the devices are. We have the instructions for all of the devices that we support and how to actually set them up. In this case, I have a Contour Next 1. So when I hit on that, it gives me the instructions of how to put that device in pairing mode. You just heard it beep there. And now that it's in pairing mode, my phone is going to ask me if I want to pair. I'm going to say yes. And in just a moment, it will have actually paired. And I'm going to click next. And this particular device that I'm holding, it has a memory on it. And I've used it before to check blood glucose many times. So it just pulled all of the historic readings that were captured by this device over time. And those are now all here preloaded into the system. So you can see some readings that were taken back a couple weeks ago. And now I'm connected. So all I have to do now as a patient is start using these devices, and the data is going to flow directly into the Impact system as soon as I take each of those measurements and be evaluated by all of the rules that are set up. So now let's take a look at what Impact looks like for a patient that's been monitoring for a while. So I'm going to go back to my multi-condition monitoring program, and the patient that I just connected is this Murphy Carter patient here. When I first click into the patient, if I set my time span to be, let's say, 3 months, and then scroll down, the first thing I see are some high-level statistics about the data types that I've been monitoring. So I can see my fasting blood glucose, my pre-meal blood glucose, post-meal. As I continue to scroll down, I can now start to see visualizations of all of the data that's been tracked. So you can see that this patient was monitoring quite frequently all the way up until about the middle of October. I can filter this view, so I can say, hey, I really only want to see what the patient's fasting blood glucoses look like, uncheck all of those. I can now see all of my fasting glucoses. I can turn all the other readings back on. And then for blood glucose, as an example, we also visualize this data across a 24-hour clock. So this is now 3 months of blood glucose data all on a 24-hour clock. And so I can start to see some new interesting patterns, like he's very good at measuring 4 times a day. A little more spotty in the evening though. Most of the high blood glucoses happen late in the evening. So now as a diabetes educator or as endocrinologist, I could start to talk about, okay, what's happening in the evening that isn't happening in the rest of the day. So I can start to really get a good picture of what's happening with everything that's going on. As I continue to scroll down, I can see his blood pressures, I can see oxygen saturation, body weight, and then here at the bottom, I can always change any of the rules that are set up for this patient. So again, insofar as the admin lets me. So if I'm getting over alerted on blood pressures, or the patient is starting to get better at managing their blood glucose and I want a tighter range going forward, I can always go ahead and update any of these goals and objectives over time. So that's a really quick look at the Impact OS platform. Just to kind of summarize here, what we looked at is we were able to create a template for the program. I was able, as the clinician, then to dial in all of the specific objectives for that patient. We provide those visualizations directly inside the clinical workflow or through a web browser for easy access. The patient was able to connect devices very easily. The rules were there in place to let me know what's going on. And I was able to see everything that's going on with my patient population. So speaking of the population, one last thing for us to look at is if I go back to the top level of impact and I go to my dashboard, I can see a high level view of everything that's happening. So the first thing I see here are a bunch of alerts. So I can see that Murphy here, blood glucose was measured less than 2 times over 3 days. So he's kind of fallen off my radar. I can see that most of these right now actually are frequency type notifications, people that have fallen off my radar. But if I click back into Murphy, a part that we skipped before were these alerts that got surfaced for him. So now I can see all of the alerts that got fired. Mostly his alerts were about falling off the radar. I can then go ahead and click on these and dismiss those. And I can say, in this case, maybe I can indicate maybe that I spent 15 minutes on this patient. And each of these notes gets collected on the patients. At any time, I can jump in and see all of the notes I've taken for this patient. As you can see, we've taken lots of notes on this patient. And what this lets me do is, if I want to use, for example, RPM billing codes with CMS, like 99457, to track on the time that I'm spending with patients, this provides me with that audit log that I can always pull to show proof of the time that I've spent with my patients. These minutes spent can also be transacted into your billing system. So if you want to automatically generate bills for any patients you've gotten at least 20 minutes for, we're able to push all of that into your system. We generally, if we're deploying in an integrated fashion, will not turn that note-taking functionality on. One of the kind of design principles of the Validic platform is that we are a platform. We always want to take advantage of the systems that are already in place. So if you have a care management solution or an electronic health record, we would prefer to deploy this in an integrated fashion and use your existing clinical documentation, use your existing billing workflows, use your existing secure messaging platform. All of those different capabilities we provide as part of the turnkey rapid deployment solution, but are able to switch those on and off depending on the systems that you already have in place. Last thing to show is we also provide a visual heads up, and my patients aren't really the best patients to look at here. So I'm going to switch to Claire's patients here. And we can see a heads up view of several patients that Claire as another provider is monitoring. And so I'm able, again, as at a population level, be able to see all the patients I'm responsible for, spark lines of their last couple of weeks of data, how many alerts they have. I can even filter that down to patients with just high priority alerts. And so now I can really get a nice top-down command and control view of my patient population. So now that we've looked at that, a couple things to hit on that just for time, I didn't demo specifically, but I do want to mention. I've mentioned a couple times the difference between Impact Rapid Deployment and the Impact Integrated solution. You saw the rapid deployment here, but our integrated solution, in addition to all of the capabilities that we saw, it's able to be directly embedded inside the clinical workflow. In this case, you can see a screenshot of Impact directly integrated inside an Epic deployment. The way this gets deployed is a new chart navigation item gets configured inside Epic. So when you're in the patient's chart, you click that button, it loads Impact directly inside the workflow. Single sign-on is passed behind the scenes. Patient context is passed behind the scenes along with patient demographics. So when you go to enroll a patient, you just click the program you want to enroll. You don't have to enter demographics. You don't have to search for patients. Um, we're able to then deliver notifications directly inside the clinical messaging system. So in Epic, that would be the Epic in basket, and a Cerner deployment, Cerner message center. Um, we're also able to do custom integration into other secure messaging systems. So like I mentioned earlier, on a care management solution, being able to write tasks to a care manager task list, being able to write secure messages to other messaging systems, all part of the Impact platform. But in addition to those notifications getting written, we're also able to deliver every data point we capture as a discrete data point to be saved in the patient's flow sheet so that it's part of your legal medical record. And that integration is part of the DNA of the Impact solution. In fact, the integrated version of Impact was available long before the rapid deployment version was. And we think that's really important because if you take a solution that was designed on day one to be integrated in other systems, it's a lot more straightforward to create a turnkey version of that that can run in a web browser. But if you start with a closed box solution and then try to figure out later how to integrate it into other platforms, you typically will struggle a lot more. And so we're really happy with the fact that we started as a platform and we continue to be a platform for integration. Another thing to mention is that onboarding workflow we showed for the patient was more of a bring your own device type of workflow. So as you saw, as the patient, I received an email asking me to download the app and then connect the devices that I had. We also support a kitted version of the HealthBridge experience. We call it HealthBridge Express. And there's only a couple key differences. The first is, for a HealthBridge Express program, you can see when the provider is enrolling the patient, they have the option to order devices for that patient. And if they turn that option on, they do need to ask the patient, when you receive your kit, what is a PIN number that you're likely to remember? And they enter that PIN number. It can always be updated later by the care team, but we want to enter it up front. And then for the devices that that program calls for, if there are needs to get more specific, in this case, like a blood pressure monitor, that can come with a small, medium, or large cuff size. The care team will pick the right cuff size and then give us a shipping address for that kit. Once they've entered that, behind the scenes, a transaction goes off to one of our third-party logistics partners who will pull the devices appropriate for that program off the shelf, prepare them with a cellular enabled tablet, then set the patient up in that tablet. So when the patient receives the kit, it's all just in a box and all they have to do is take it out of the box and turn it on, and everything is already set up and ready to go. So that BP cuff and that pulse oximeter in this example were already pre-set up, and all I had to do is log in with my PIN and everything's good to go. And we call that HealthBridge Express. It's just another way to onboard your most acute patients in a very rapid fashion, with very little work that they have to do. We don't need to worry about them setting things up. We don't need to worry about their Wi-Fi or cell connectivity, what kind of phone they have. We just send them that kit and they're out of the box, ready to go. So hopefully through this demo, you saw the complete cycle of a program administrator setting up those programs, rolling that out to a care team who can onboard patients very quickly. Patients can be invited to connect their own devices, or pre-configured kits can be sent to them. And then as they measure, all of those rules run in real time to engage the right members of the care team at the right time so that we can provide the best care for every member of our population, whether it's our most acute, getting a pre-configured kit where we can keep very close tabs on them, all the way down to our patients that may only have one chronic condition and they're just starting to learn how to manage that condition for the long haul. We feel like Validic is the platform that lets you go to the broadest parts of your population in the most cost-effective, efficient, high outcomes fashion possible. Thank you for your time. Look forward to any questions that you might have.